Good afternoon and welcome to the May 11th, 2021 Ordinance Committee meeting. Ms. Crisante, if you would take roll, please.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Mayor Jordan.
And here. So we'll move on to public comment for any items that are not on today's agenda. Ms. Crisante, I'll let you walk anybody through that.
Great. If you would like to speak on items not on the agenda, please raise your hand within the app. It doesn't look like we have anybody who would like to speak on items not on the agenda.
Okay, thanks. We'll close public comment and we'll move on to our item of the day. Title of that is Average Unit Size Density Incentive Program Ordinance Amendments related to something that I lost on the screen. So let me go over and read that again off of the staff report. Related to the city's AUD program incentives to exclude mobile home parks from development under the program and increase the inclusionary requirement outside the central business district. All right, who are we being joined by from staff? Hello, Ms. Brooke. Let's take it away.
Good afternoon, Committee Member Jordan. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we are talking about the average unit size density incentive program and some pretty limited amendments to that program. I'm specifically asking the Ordinance Committee to consider increasing the inclusionary housing requirement to 15% for AUD rental projects outside of the central business district. Also clarify that state density bonus law units cannot satisfy the city's inclusionary housing unit requirement, and clarify that AUD program development standards do not apply to mobile home parks. And I'll touch on those a little bit more as we go through. And I do want to mention, just by way of background, this package of amendments is before you today based on City Council direction from October of 2020, and it's been through Planning Commission and then now here at Ordinance Committee, and I'll give you a brief summary of the steps along the way. Next slide, please. Just wanted to give a little bit of background on inclusionary housing. That term is used. What it means in essence is it's a local requirement to provide affordable units within private housing projects. So it's a mechanism that cities and counties use to produce income restricted or rent restricted affordable housing in trade for usually some other incentives offered to the developer to offset the financial implications of restricting some of the units to affordable income levels. That might come in the way of additional parking reductions or other development incentives. And then cities also offer an alternative way, usually, to meet an inclusionary housing requirement that can represent the full spectrum of different project sizes. So larger projects might be able to accommodate a certain number of affordable units and still be able to be financially feasible. We have at the city, as well as most cities, in lieu fee for those smaller projects where it's just too much to actually restrict one or more of the units to a lower rental rate. So next slide, please. And by way of background, again, the city has had a requirement for inclusionary housing for ownership housing projects since 2004. That has an in lieu fee component as well. And then in July 2019, City Council adopted inclusionary housing requirements for rental projects. And next slide. And then our current inclusionary housing requirements for the AUD program rental units are as such. So projects with 10 or more units, the developer must restrict at least 10% of the total units in the project to rental rates affordable to moderate income households. For those projects between 4 and 10 units, more than 4, less than 10, they can either restrict one unit within the project to a rental rate affordable to moderate income households or pay an in lieu fee. Next slide, please. I just wanted to remind everybody, and we're talking about moderate income because that's what the income level that our current rental inclusionary housing is set at it's that 81 to 120% of area median income that we're targeting very specifically with our rental inclusionary housing requirements. So next slide, please. Getting to the City Council direction from October of 2020, you had a discussion item on your agenda that day and directed staff and the Planning Commission to consider some changes to the inclusionary housing requirements for rental projects under the AUD program. Specifically that we increase the inclusionary requirement from 10% to 15% of all rental units in projects located outside the central business district. And then as part of that, you also gave direction that if by doing that mathematical equation, the outcome resulted in a fractional unit, that we would round down to the next whole number down rather than up, which is what's typically done in inclusionary or bonus density projects. Next slide. We also asked that council clarify, and you did in October of last year, that if a developer wants to propose low or low income units to satisfy the state density bonus law and then get additional units through that state program, that those can't be used to substitute or satisfy the city's local inclusionary housing requirement for moderate income units. And that was very specifically developed, as I said, as the city developed our inclusionary housing requirements for rental housing. We know very much that we are missing the moderate income sector for our housing units. And so the language, if continues through Ordinance Committee and to Council, would make that very clear by removing this one subsection in the municipal code that a developer would need to provide both state bonus density and inclusionary if they wanted to take advantage of both. And next slide. Then the third component of this is a cleanup amendment. We realized as we were going through and making other amendments to the AUD program that there was one previous amendment to the AUD program to clarify that the program development standards do not apply to existing mobile home parks was inadvertently admitted from subsequent ordinance amendments. So I think we were just doing so many amendments to the AD program at one point in time that one of the ordinances presented to council hadn't yet caught up and had that January 2019 action, which council had adopted at that time to try to protect existing mobile home parks from being redeveloped into multi-unit housing. So we want to add that back in. So it's kind of a cleanup amendment. You and your council had already adopted that. We just need to get it back in the code because it was inadvertently omitted from a subsequent package of amendments. And then the next slide. As I mentioned, so after we received council direction last year, we presented the council direction to Planning Commission on April 8th of this year. Their recommendation to City Council was to defer making any more amendments to the AUD program, specifically this package related to inclusionary housing requirements until we have the results of an updated economic feasibility study, which I anticipate we might have around September, October of this year. So they would recommend deferring any changes to that until we have that information. They do recommend approving the cleanup amendments to get that protection for our existing mobile home parks added back into the code. And then the last slide is just summarizing the recommendation for your consideration today, that you consider these amendments and then forward a recommendation to City Council for action. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. Thanks, Ms. Brooke. Questions from the committee? Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. I have a question about what happens with those in lieu fees. I just keep having this continual question about what benefit that is to anybody. I don't understand how they're used. If you could help me with that.
Certainly, Committee Member Sneddon. So we've collected in lieu fees from both our ownership inclusionary housing program since 2004, and then much less so since 2019 with the rental unit inclusionary housing. When they get collected, they get put into inclusionary housing fund, which to this point, that fund sits at about $700,000. And it just hasn't amounted to enough to really to build anything. The intention is that if we collected enough money, we would go facilitate or partner with somebody to actually build affordable units, because that's the in lieu part of not providing them within the development. So it's just a matter of not collecting enough yet. We've had, you know, a lot of the larger projects are just developing the units on site. So we're not getting fees from those larger projects.
Okay, well, it seems to me maybe we should consider, we can save this for discussion, but if those in lieu fees aren't large enough to actually produce anything, then they should be larger. I mean, if people are paying in lieu fees instead of building a unit, but we're not getting enough in lieu fees to actually build any units, it doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me, but I guess that's something we can discuss. And then for the question for the, I guess the slide before the Planning Commission recommendations, if we defer the proposed amendments, and one slide forward, it's slide 10. If we defer them until the updated economic feasibility study, could we make the recommendation but not to go below 15%? I mean, you know, the council recommended 15% outside of CBD. And if this economic feasibility study comes back and says, you know, 0% is what's economically feasible, could we make the recommendation, if we don't move this forward today, could we put the restriction on it that not to go lower than the recommended 15% from council direction?
Committee member Snedden, I think I might need a little bit more information. If you recommended to council to not act on the amendments to the AUD program, inclusionary requirements, it would sit where it's at now, which is 10% citywide. So I'm not understanding the second part, I guess, of what would happen between now and October or.
Okay, so between now and October, well, that economic feasibility study is for the FAR, isn't it? It's not for the AUD.
Correct, right. It's for the successor to the AUD program, and we would expect to be at council with recommendations on that probably around November, December this year. So if you did not make any changes to the AUD program inclusionary requirement now, it would be packaged all together for your consideration with FARs and all other aspects that we're amending in probably, December, January, actually.
Okay, that we're possibly amending, yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? So Ms. Brooke, could you just run me through that timeline again? You just talked about there's two different, well, I have a bunch. So I kind of have a bunch of questions on the 0-7 vote at Planning Commission for a different recommendation, and then you're still bringing the original recommendation. Is the concern is that we would just continue as we're going right now through September or December with the same number? Is that staff's concern?
Committee member Jordan, so the reason we're presenting to you Planning Commission's recommendation, their role is to recommend to City Council, and they did that. We're honoring City Council's original direction to staff. You did say consider as a council. You said consider increasing it to 15%. And so we went through with Planning Commission. They're recommending not making any changes right now. If I were more concerned that we are missing out on units, I would be making a strong recommendation to you. I'm coming in sort of agnostic because we haven't missed any projects at this point. Since your direction back in October and everything we have pending right now, there are no projects that would have been caught in this 15% increase because we just haven't seen projects 10 units or more outside the central business district.
Yeah. Sure. Do you have any thoughts on just the current state of construction and construction costs and weighing that against, I mean, I know housing starts are coming back with people I know, single family housing units are just dropping. They were out of control and now they're dropping off with first wood prices and now metals prices are following the same track. I'm just wondering, you know, just your subject matter expert thoughts on balancing do you really think somebody's going to come in with a new 10+ project in the next 6 months, or is it a reasonable alternative actually to wait for both of those stages, for both the two steps, the two processes you described coming back? So you'd wait for September, October, and also wait for December, January, and then just make one big decision for amendments at that time. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think we're at great risk, like I said, of missing out on capturing some more affordable units by if this proceeded to council in June and became effective in July because it's 30 days later. We're getting pretty close to when we're going to start talking about the next iteration of multi-unit housing standards and inclusionary requirements. It was already deemed by Kaiser Marston slightly marginal to a developer to provide 15% inclusionary in the priority overlay. So it could make it that much more difficult to get a housing project of 10 units or more outside the central business district if it's increased to 15%. I mean, that's the argument you hear on the other side of it, is it actually going to disincentivize housing? All in the interest of trying to get more affordable housing.
Yeah, okay, all right. I have no further questions. Don't see anybody else popping up. So Ms. Crisante, if we could go to public comment. I see several people there. I'm assuming they're waiting for this item.
Currently, Chair Jordan, nobody has raised their hands. Oh, we have John Campanella. John, go ahead and unmute yourself and please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just to be clear, I think on the recommendations for the use of a consultant for feasibility, part of the reason for using a consultant was to tie in both the FARs as proposed as well as what level of affordability could be withstood. So it's not just unit sizes or FAR, but it's also looking at affordability. And they are going hand in hand. And I think I really recommend that you pay attention to what Planning Commission unanimously recommended. You need to look at the FARs because right now in draft form, some of these commercial areas outside the CBD may actually be lower in their FARs than are currently provided under the AUD program. Specifically, the 1.5 and the 2.0 areas is proposed. So in order to properly structure those FARs so they work, you really not need to look at inclusionary amounts that you're requiring at the same time. I mean, the idea is to produce more affordable housing if we can, but also to get projects approved. And given the lack of project submissions or starts that we've seen outside the CBD to date, really, I think the incentive that the city is trying to provide through the FAR program, we don't want to have that overcome by inclusionary that really cannot be supported. So once again, I think wait a few months, do it the right way. And the Kaiser Marston report essentially had land value in commercial areas at $143 a foot, and it was marginal. So ask brokers today what land or buildings are costing, especially in the CBD and outside the CBD as well. not just construction costs, but also land costs have really gone up. So I think you have to get updated information on all of those statistics and what reality is out there before making the decision on increasing inclusionary. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Campanella. Any other speakers, Mr. Crisante?
And not at this time.
Okay, and we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee for discussion and action. Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. I'd like to move forward the staff recommendations to the rest of council. I just want to say that I'm a pretty strong supporter of having a high threshold for inclusionary housing, because I believe that our community needs it now more than ever, and I hope that we can make it happen.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sneddon?
Thank you, Chair Jordan and Councilman Gutierrez. I know that we agree on the 15% inclusionary outside of the CBD, and I'm going to say that I think it's worthwhile to move it with the 15% inclusionary requirement now. My concern is that we will backslide. Every time there's a new study, it confirms that land prices are going up. Obviously, it's Santa Barbara, that construction costs are going up, that the feasibility becomes more and more difficult, and I understand that. But if the study comes back and says 15% is not feasible, really it should be 0%. My concern is that if we don't recommend and continue to recommend, like we did out of council, that we have that 15% inclusionary, I think it's going to get lost. And I think it will not be a consistent recommendation for that 15%. And if we're not losing any projects anyway, as Ms. Brooke and Chair Jordan sort of indicated, then I don't see what difference it would make. So if there aren't any projects coming through either way, and not worried about missing any, if one does come through, it'll have that 15%, and that will be a placeholder for a consistent recommendation. So I would be in favor of moving forward, absolutely. If we could have the recommendations on, I mean, I have them on my screen, but I'm not sure they're on this screen, but to approve the amendments to further protect mobile home parks from redevelopment, absolutely, no question. But I would rather not defer the proposed amendments to the AUD program, just because they're delayed and it takes a long time to get them here. And then by that time we have new tweaks coming. I don't think that's any reason to not move forward with the 15% that we fought actually really hard for in our council vote to hold that firm. So I would like to instead, oh, I see, on my screen I had the Planning Commission recommendation. This is staff's recommendation. Let me just read it to be sure that I'm saying the right thing.
This is what you just articulated.
Excellent. Then absolutely, yes, I agree. I want to make sure that I'm understanding. I had the Planning Commission recommendation on my screen. Thank you, Chair Jordan. So this, Councilmember Gutierrez, this is what you were recommending, that we move forward with the 15% inclusionary. Okay. And yes, well then, yes, I second that motion. Thank you.
So I'll thank you for both of you, and I'll play devil's advocate in that it's a little disconcerting to have all 7 members of Planning Commission actually agree on something, and it's not this first paragraph, so it gives me pause. I also have a builder industry person in the House who's seen just a tremendous back down in local construction due to the cost of materials that are just skyrocketing. And I, you know, I guess I'd use the word messy. I would prefer to see all of this put in the same in the same recipe and handled at one time. I really don't have a disagreement with, there's none starting. There's no reason to leave it at 10, not put it to 15, because there's still not going to be anything starting for the next several months, the way I see trends going in the industry. But I would just as soon, for almost the same reasons as Councilmember Sneddon said, you know, I would just like to have all the pieces in front of me at the same time instead of have to come back and change another one again. So I will just be the fly in the ointment for this one, and we can move it on for further discussion at council. So there's a motion and a second to adopt the recommendation that's on the screen, and that is to remove mobile home parks from AUD program development standards, and also then to amend the AUD density incentive program to increase to 15% inclusionary for rental projects outside of the CBD. So Ms. Crisante, if you would take a roll call, please.
So we will forward the staff recommendations to council, moved by Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez, seconded by Councilmember Sneddon. Mayor Pro Tem Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes.
And Chair Jordan.
No. So that passes 2-1. We'll get a chance to talk about it further at council when it arrives there. And I don't see any other business, right? So we will adjourn. Thanks so much.